The rushing waters of the Colorado River sounded like thunder in Zane Sullivan's ears as he rode his dun stallion along the muddy banks. The spring of 1875 had brought torrential rains to Colorado territory, turning the normally peaceful river into a swollen, raging beast. Zane pulled his worn leather hat down against the light drizzle, squinting through the gray morning mist. That's when he saw it, something pale caught against the rocks near the bend, something that didn't belong among the debris and driftwood. His heart hammered as he recognized the unmistakable form of a person. "Whoa, Dust," he commanded, pulling his horse to a stop and dismounting in one fluid motion. The 30-year-old cowboy had seen his share of river tragedies. Spring floods took lives every year, travelers underestimating the current, children playing too close to unstable banks, or desperate people making poor crossing choices. Zane scrambled down the slippery embankment, mud caking his worn boots. As he drew closer, he could make out a woman's form, her sodden dress clinging to her still body, long dark hair spread like seaweed across the rocky shore. "Madam," he called, knowing even as the word left his mouth that she couldn't hear him. She lay motionless, face down in the mud, one arm trapped between two large rocks where the current had wedged her. Zane waded into the shallow water near the bank, the cold seeping through his denims. He reached the woman and carefully turned her over, brushing tangled hair from her face. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with delicate features now pale and lifeless. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that made his stomach clench. Without hesitation, he lifted her from the water and carried her to drier ground, laying her gently on her back. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for any sign of life. Nothing. "Come on now," he muttered, tilting her head back slightly and pinching her nose. He'd seen this done once before by an army doctor when a young cowhand had fallen into a cattle trough. Zane sealed his mouth over hers and breathed steadily, watching her chest rise with each breath he gave her. After several moments of breathing for her, he pressed his hands against her sternum and pushed rhythmically. Water trickled from her blue lips, but she remained lifeless. "Breathe, damn it," he urged, continuing his efforts. The cold rain fell harder now, pelting his back as he worked. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as he alternated between chest compressions and breathing into her mouth. Just as his hope began to fade, the woman's body convulsed. She coughed violently, water spewing from her mouth as she gasped and choked. Zane quickly turned her onto her side, supporting her as she expelled the river from her lungs. "That's it," he encouraged softly. "Get it all out." Her eyes fluttered open, striking hazel eyes wide with fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but could only manage another round of coughing. "Easy now," Zane soothed. "You're safe. The river nearly took you, but you're going to be all right." She stared at him, still struggling to breathe normally, her body shivering violently. Zane shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, knowing he needed to get her warm quickly. "My name's Zane Sullivan," he said, trying to keep her conscious. "I've got a cabin not far from here." "Can you tell me your name?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Lorelai Zimmerman. Miss Zimmerman, I need to get you somewhere warm. My place is closest." He paused, aware of how this might sound to a proper lady. "I swear on my mother's grave I'm only looking to help you." She nodded weakly, too exhausted to protest. Zane lifted her into his arms, struck by how light she felt despite her waterlogged clothing. He carried her up the embankment where his horse waited patiently. "Dust here is steady as they come," he assured her as he lifted her onto the saddle. "I'm going to sit behind you to make sure you don't fall." Zane mounted behind her, reaching around to take the reins while supporting her with his other arm. She leaned back against his chest, her body still trembling uncontrollably. "Stay with me, Miss Zimmerman," he urged as they set off at a gentle pace. "My cabin's just beyond that ridge. Talk to me if you can. What brought you to the river?" Her voice came in broken fragments. "Stage, ambush, bridge gave way, current." "Save your strength," he said, piecing together that she must have been on the stagecoach that was scheduled to pass through. There had been rumors of bandits in the area. "We'll sort it all out once you're warm." The ride to Zane's cabin took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours as he felt Lorelai's body growing more limp against him. The cabin came into view, a modest but sturdy structure nestled among tall pines with smoke still rising from the chimney. Zane dismounted first, then carefully lifted Lorelai down. He carried her inside, kicking the door closed behind them. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them immediately, the fire he'd built before leaving still burning low in the stone hearth. He laid her gently on his bed, a simple frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in relatively clean linens. "Miss Zimmerman," he said firmly, seeing her eyes drift closed, "you need to get out of those wet clothes. I have some things that might fit you." He moved to a wooden trunk and pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers. "They'll be big, but they're dry." She nodded, attempting to sit up but lacking the strength. Zane hesitated. "Madam, I don't mean to be improper, but you need help. You'll catch your death otherwise." A faint flush colored her pale cheeks, but she nodded again. "Turn around," she whispered. Zane helped her sit up, then turned his back, handing the dry clothes over his shoulder. He heard the soft rustle of fabric and her labored breathing as she struggled to change. "I can't." "The buttons," she finally admitted. Zane closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself. "I'll help, but I'll be a gentleman about it." He turned to find her clutching his flannel shirt closed over her chest, her wet dress pooled around her waist. With efficient movements and eyes averted as much as possible, he helped her remove the sodden garment and slip into his clothes. Her skin felt like ice beneath his fingertips. Once she was changed, he piled every blanket he owned on top of her, then stoked the fire to blazing. "I'll make some coffee," he said, moving to the small cast-iron stove. "It'll help warm you from the inside." She watched him with those remarkable hazel eyes, still shivering but less violently now. "Why were you there?" she asked, her voice stronger. "At the river." Zane measured coffee grounds into the pot. "I check the river when it rains heavy. Lost a good horse last spring when the banks gave way. Never thought I'd find a person instead." Lorelai pulled the blankets tighter around her shoulders. "You saved my life, Mr. Sullivan." "Zane," he corrected, pouring water into the pot. "And anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with surprising certainty. "Not anyone." While the coffee brewed, Zane hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry. The simple dress and petticoats spoke of modest means, though the quality of the fabric suggested she wasn't destitute. "The stage was headed to Eagle Pass," she offered without prompting. "I was going to work for the Thorndyke family as a governess." Zane nodded as he poured the coffee into 2 tin cups. "The Thorndykes have 3 little ones, if I recall. They live just outside town." "You know them?" she asked, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "Know of them," he corrected. "Eagle Pass isn't large." "Most folks know each other, at least by reputation." "And what's yours?" she asked, a hint of wariness entering her voice now that her immediate danger had passed. Zane settled into the room's only chair. "I ranch a small spread about 5 miles from here. This cabin's just a line shack I use when I'm working this section of my land. Most folks in town would tell you I keep to myself, do honest work, and pay my debts." She sipped the coffee, color gradually returning to her face. "What about the others on the stage?" "There were 4 passengers and the driver." Zane's expression grew grave. "I didn't see anyone else. Once you're stronger, I'll ride out to check the river crossing. If there were others who went in, they might have washed further downstream." Lorelai's eyes filled with tears. They were kind people. A young married couple moving west and an older gentleman going to visit his daughter. "The river's angry this time of year," Zane said quietly, "but sometimes folks turn up alive. Don't lose hope yet." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. "You should rest," Zane finally said, rising from his chair. "I'll ride into town when the rain lets up. The Thorndikes should be told you're safe, and I can check if there's news of the others." "Where will you sleep?" she asked, noting the cabin's sparse furnishings. "I've got bedrolls in the lean-to. I'll be fine." She looked like she wanted to argue but was too exhausted. Her eyes were already drifting closed, the ordeal and warmth finally overtaking her. Zane watched her for a moment, struck by how different she looked now that color had returned to her face. She was beautiful in a quiet, dignified way, not flashy like the saloon girls in town, but with a natural elegance that seemed at odds with her current circumstances. He wondered what her story was, what had driven her to seek employment so far from anywhere. Most young women traveled with family or husbands. A lone woman journeying to become a governess suggested she had no one. Much like himself. The thought unsettled him, and he busied himself with preparations to ride to town once the weather cleared. By the time he'd gathered what he needed, Lorelai was sleeping deeply, her breathing even and strong. It was a good sign. She was young and appeared healthy. With rest and care, she'd recover fully. The question that lingered in Zane's mind as he settled into the chair to wait out the rain was what would happen then. The rain finally subsided near dusk, too late for Zane to make the trip to Eagle Pass. He'd spent the afternoon maintaining a discreet vigil over his unexpected guest, splitting his time between indoor chores and checking on his horse. Lorelai had slept deeply for hours, her body recuperating from its near-fatal encounter with the river. When she finally stirred, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of sunset filtering through the single window. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice stronger than before. Zane closed the book he'd been reading and set it aside. "Nearly sundown. You've been asleep most of the day." Lorelai pushed herself up to sitting, wincing slightly. Every muscle in her body ached, but her mind was clear now. "I'm sorry to impose on you for another night." "It's no imposition," he assured her, rising to stoke the fire. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by cattle," she admitted with a small smile, "but considerably better than drowning." The smile transformed her face, and Zane found himself staring for a moment too long before looking away. "Hungry? I've got beans and bacon." "Not exactly fine dining, but it'll fill your belly." "That sounds wonderful," she said, attempting to stand. Zane moved quickly to her side. "Easy now, you've been through an ordeal." She accepted his steadying hand, surprised by how solid and warm his grip felt. Standing fully, Lorelai realized how much taller he was. She barely reached his shoulder. In the better light, she took in his features for the first time. Strong jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard, straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. He wasn't classically handsome, but there was something compelling about his face, a kindness in his eyes that contrasted with his weathered appearance. Lorelai became acutely aware that she was wearing his clothes, that this stranger had not only saved her life but had seen her in a state of undress. Heat crept up her neck. "My dress," she said, spotting it hanging by the fire. "Is it dry?" "Should be," Zane replied, stepping back to give her space. "I'll step outside while you change." "Thank you," she said, genuinely appreciating his consideration. Once alone, Lorelai changed quickly, finding her dress mostly dry though somewhat wrinkled. Her petticoats were still damp at the hems, but she could manage without them for now. As she buttoned her bodice, she caught her reflection in a small mirror hanging by the door. She hardly recognized herself. Her normally neat dark hair hung in tangled waves around her face. A purple bruise had formed on her left cheekbone, and smaller scrapes marked her forehead and chin. She looked wild, unkempt, nothing like the proper young woman who had boarded the stagecoach yesterday morning. Yesterday. It seemed impossible that only a day had passed since her life had been upended. Again, a soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Decent," Zane called. "Yes, please come in." He entered carrying a bucket of fresh water. "Thought you might want to wash up a bit." "I've got a comb too, if you'd like." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That would be wonderful." While Zane busied himself preparing their simple meal, Lorelai used the water and a scrap of cloth to clean her face and hands. The comb, clearly not something Zane used often on his own short hair, helped her tame her tangled locks into a semblance of order. "I'm sorry I can't offer you better accommodations," Zane said as he placed a plate of food on the small table. "This place wasn't built with ladies in mind." "After nearly drowning, this feels like a palace," she assured him, taking a seat. "I can never repay you for what you've done." Zane looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No need for repayment, just doing what's right." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Lorelai realizing how famished she was only after taking her first bite. The simple meal tasted better than any fine dining she'd experienced in her previous life. "May I ask where you're from originally, Miss Zimmerman?" Zane finally asked. Lorelai hesitated. She had practiced her story, crafted it carefully, but in this moment lying to the man who had saved her life felt wrong. Still, old habits were difficult to break. "St. Louis originally," she said, which was true enough. "My parents passed 2 years ago, fever." "That part was a lie. I'm sorry to hear that," Zane said sincerely. "No other family," she shook her head. "No one close. I've been working as a teacher and governess since." Another partial truth. "The position with the Thorndikes offered better wages than I could find in St. Louis." "They're good people," Zane confirmed. "Marcus Thorndike made his money in shipping before moving west. His wife Emily is active in town affairs. You'll be treated well there." "If they'll still have me," Lorelai worried. "I was expected yesterday." "They'll understand once they hear what happened," Zane assured her. "Eagle Pass isn't so formal as eastern cities. Folks know that travel can be dangerous. And you," she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "Have you always been in Colorado?" A shadow passed over his face. "No. Grew up in Texas. Came north after the war." His clipped response suggested this wasn't a topic he wished to explore, and Lorelai respected that. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to leave undisturbed. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked instead. 5 years, he replied, his expression softening. "It's not much, about 100 head of cattle, a few horses, enough to get by." "You manage it alone?" "Hire hands for roundup and branding, but otherwise, yes." He paused. "I prefer the quiet." Something in his tone resonated with Lorelai. She understood the appeal of solitude, especially when the alternative was unwelcome attention. "Tomorrow I'll take you into Eagle Pass," Zane said, changing the subject. "It's about 2 hours' ride from here, if you're feeling strong enough." "I'll be ready," she assured him, though the thought of leaving the safety of this cabin and facing her new life brought a flutter of anxiety. After dinner, Zane insisted Lorelai take his bed again while he made do with blankets near the fire. Despite her protests, he was adamant. "You're still recovering," he said firmly. And my mother raised me better than to let a lady sleep on the floor." As Lorelai settled under the blankets, she watched Zane move around the cabin, banking the fire for the night and checking the door latch. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, the quiet competence in everything he did. "Mr. Sullivan, Zane," she corrected when he glanced her way. "Thank you again, not just for saving me but for your kindness afterward." He nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with praise. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. We've got a long ride tomorrow." In the dim light of the dying fire, Lorelai watched as he settled on his makeshift bed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly safe in another person's presence. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but not unwelcome. With that comforting thought, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Zane was already up and moving when Lorelai awoke, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the small cabin. "Good morning," he greeted when he noticed her stirring. "How are you feeling today?" Lorelai sat up, taking stock of her body's complaints. "Sore, but much improved." "I think I can manage the ride to town." "Good," he nodded, sliding a plate of food onto the table. "Eat up. We'll leave within the hour." While they ate breakfast, Zane outlined their journey. "We'll follow the Eastern Trail. It's longer but avoids the river crossing." "I don't trust that bridge after yesterday's rains." "Did you check for the others?" Lorelai asked hesitantly. "At first light," he confirmed, his expression solemn. "Rode a mile downstream, found some debris from the coach but no people." "That could be good news. Maybe they made it to shore elsewhere." Lorelai nodded, clinging to that hope, though she suspected the truth was grimmer. She'd seen how quickly the current had taken the stagecoach when the bridge collapsed, heard the terrified screams of her fellow passengers. After breakfast, Zane saddled his horse while Lorelai gathered her few recovered possessions. Her small carpetbag was gone, lost to the river along with everything she owned except the clothes on her back, and a locket containing a small portrait of her mother that hung around her neck. "Ready?" Zane asked, appearing in the doorway. "As I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. Outside, Dust waited patiently, saddled and ready. Zane had attached a bedroll and provisions to the back of the saddle. "I'll ride behind you again," he explained, helping her mount. "It's easier on Dust that way, distributes the weight better." Lorelai settled into the saddle, acutely aware of Zane as he mounted behind her. His chest was solid against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. The intimacy of the position was not lost on her, nor was the fact that in any other circumstance it would be scandalously improper. But these were not ordinary circumstances, and Zane Sullivan was proving himself to be a man of honor. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, the trail winding through pine forests and open meadows bursting with spring wildflowers. The beauty of the landscape helped distract Lorelai from her aching muscles and uncertain future. "May I ask you something personal?" she finally ventured. "You can ask," Zane replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Can't promise I'll answer." "Why do you live alone? A man like you. I would think you'd have a wife, children." His silence lasted so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I was married once," he finally said, his voice low near her ear. "During the war. I was young, barely 20. She died of typhoid while I was fighting. By the time I got the letter, she'd been buried for months." "I'm sorry," Lorelai said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was a lifetime ago," he replied, but she could hear the lingering pain. "After the war, I didn't see much point in trying again. Came north, bought land, built a life that depends on no one but me." "And you're content?" she asked. "Most days," he admitted. "Though I won't pretend the winters aren't long." Lorelai understood isolation, had sought it herself after fleeing St. Louis, but her isolation had been born of necessity rather than choice. "What about you?" Zane asked. "No suitors in St. Louis." It was her turn to fall silent, weighing how much to reveal. "There was someone," she finally said. "It didn't end well." Something in her tone must have conveyed the depth of that understatement because Zane didn't press further. Instead, he pointed to a hawk circling overhead, changing the subject to safer territory. As they crested a rise, Eagle Pass came into view in the valley below. It was larger than Lorelai had expected, several streets of buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest, and outlying farms dotting the surrounding countryside. "Population's around 600, Zane explained. "Used to be mostly a mining town, but it's diversified in recent years. Got a proper school now, a doctor, 2 general stores competing for business. It looks civilized," Lorelai observed with relief. Zane chuckled. "Mostly. Still get the occasional Saturday night ruckus when the Cowboys come to town, but the marshal keeps things in hand." As they approached the outskirts, Lorelai became increasingly conscious of her appearance. Her wrinkled, river-stained dress and wild hair would certainly attract attention, as would her arrival on horseback with Zane. "Perhaps we should stop at the dressmaker's first," she suggested anxiously. "I can't present myself to the Thorndikes looking like this." "You nearly died yesterday," Zane reminded her gently. "I think they'll forgive your appearance." Before she could argue further, a rider approached them from town, spurring his horse to a trot. The man wore a badge on his vest that caught the sunlight. "Sullivan," the man called as he drew near. "Thought that was you. We've been looking for you." Zane reined dust to a stop. "Marshal Davis. Something wrong?" The marshal's eyes shifted to Lorelai. "You're from the stagecoach, ain't you?" "The Eastern lady." "Yes," she confirmed, surprised. "Lorelai Zimmerman. How did you know?" "Driver and 1 passenger made it to town late yesterday. Told us the coach went down with 3 others still inside." His expression softened. "They thought you were lost for certain." "Mr. Sullivan found me downriver," Lorelai explained. "He saved my life." The marshal nodded, unsurprised. "Sullivan's got a knack for being in the right place." He turned back to Zane. "The Thorndikes have been beside themselves, especially after we found 2 bodies washed up near Hanson's mill this morning." Lorelai's hand flew to her mouth. "Who?" "Older gentleman and the young husband," the marshal said grimly. "Still looking for the wife." "Listen, I'll ride ahead and let the Thorndikes know you're coming. Their place is about a mile past the north end of town." "Much obliged," Zane said. As the marshal rode off, Lorelai leaned back against Zane's chest, suddenly overwhelmed. "Those poor people," she whispered. "I spoke with them just yesterday morning. They were so full of hopes for their new life." Zane's arms tightened slightly around her, a gesture of comfort that spoke more than words. "The West takes its toll," he said quietly. "Always has." They continued into town, drawing curious glances from those they passed. Eagle Pass's main street was bustling with morning activity, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks, freight wagons unloading goods, and ranch hands on various errands. "Would you like to stop somewhere first?" Zane offered. "The hotel has a dining room where you could freshen up." Lorelai was tempted but shook her head. "No, let's continue to the Thorndikes. I've kept them waiting long enough." The Thorndike residence proved to be a handsome 2-story house set on several acres at the town's edge. A white fence surrounded well-kept grounds, and a small orchard bloomed with spring blossoms behind the house. As they approached, the front door opened, and a couple hurried out, a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples and a plump, kind-faced woman. They were followed by 3 children ranging from about 5 to 10 years of age. "Miss Zimmerman." the woman called, hurrying toward them as Zane helped Lorelai dismount. "Thank heavens you're alive. We were so terribly worried, Mrs. Thorndyke," Lorelai greeted, suddenly self-conscious about her bedraggled appearance. "I'm so sorry for the delay." "Nonsense," Mr. Thorndyke interjected, stepping forward to shake Zane's hand vigorously. "Sullivan, the marshal, told us what you did. We're in your debt, sir." Zane looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Just happened to be in the right place." "Providence, I'd say," Mrs. Thorndyke declared, taking Lorelai's arm. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted. Children, say hello to Miss Zimmerman. She'll be your new governess." The children, 2 boys and a girl, regarded Lorelai with undisguised curiosity, particularly focused on her bruised face and disheveled hair. "Did you really almost drown, miss?" the oldest boy asked bluntly. "Thomas, manners," his mother scolded. "It's all right," Lorelai assured her with a smile. "Yes, I did nearly drown, Thomas, but Mr. Sullivan saved me." The children's attention shifted to Zane, who stood awkwardly holding Dust's reins. The youngest boy approached him fearlessly. "Are you a real cowboy?" he asked, eyes wide. "James," Mr. Thorndyke began, but Zane waved him off. "It's fine," he said, crouching to the boy's level. "I am. I raise cattle on my ranch outside of town." "Do you have a gun?" James asked excitedly. "James." Both parents exclaimed in unison. Zane chuckled. "I do, but I don't often need to use it. Mostly I use my rope and my horse." Mrs. Thorndyke shook her head indulgently. "You must come in for lunch, Mr. Sullivan. It's the least we can do." Zane glanced at Lorelai, something unreadable passing across his face. "That's kind of you, madam, but I should be getting back. Got cattle that need tending." Lorelai felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She'd known, of course, that their paths would diverge once they reached town, but the prospect of never seeing him again suddenly seemed wrong somehow. "At least let us pay you for your trouble," Mr. Thorndyke insisted. Zane's expression hardened slightly. "No payment necessary. I'd do the same for anyone." An awkward silence fell until Lorelai stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly, "thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." He met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. "You take care, Miss Zimmerman," he said simply. Then, with a tip of his hat to the Thorndykes, he mounted his horse and rode away. Lorelai watched him go, a strange emptiness settling in her chest. It was foolish, she knew, to feel attached to a man she'd known for barely a day. And yet, as she turned to follow the Thorndykes into their house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was riding away with Zane Sullivan. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Lorelai settled into her new position. The Thorndykes proved to be kind employers, and their children Thomas, Elizabeth, and James were generally well-behaved, if somewhat high-spirited. Mrs. Thorndyke had insisted Lorelai take several days to recover from her ordeal, before beginning her duties, during which time she'd been outfitted with new clothing and given a comfortable room of her own. Eagle Pass was exactly the kind of place Lorelai had hoped to find, large enough to offer some anonymity, but small enough to feel secure. The townspeople had welcomed her warmly, especially after hearing of her near drowning and dramatic rescue. The young wife from the stagecoach had never been found. A memorial service was held for all 3 victims the Sunday after Lorelai's arrival, attended by most of the town. Lorelai had sat with the Thorndykes, acutely aware that she could easily have been among those being mourned. During those first 2 weeks, she found herself scanning crowds and streets whenever she ventured into town, hoping for a glimpse of Zane Sullivan. But he never appeared, and she was too prideful to ask about him. It wasn't until her third Sunday in Eagle Pass, as the Thorndike's carriage approached the small white church, that she finally saw him again. Zane stood talking with several men outside the church, dressed in clothes she hadn't seen before: clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest. His hat was in his hands, his dark hair neatly combed. He looked different, almost unrecognizable compared to the rugged cowboy who had pulled her from the river. He glanced up as their carriage stopped, and their eyes met. Lorelai felt her heart quicken inexplicably. "Mr. Sullivan attends church most Sundays," Mrs. Thorndike commented, noticing the direction of Lorelai's gaze. "Keeps to himself otherwise. Rarely comes to town except for supplies. He seems private," Lorelai observed, trying to sound casual as they descended from the carriage. "Lost a lot in the war, from what I understand," Mr. Thorndike added in a low voice. "Good man, though. Honest as the day is long." The Thorndike children spotted friends and raced off, leaving the adults to make their way to the church more sedately. Inevitably, their path intersected with Zane's group. "Sullivan," Mr. Thorndike greeted warmly. "Good to see you in town." "Thorndike," Zane nodded, his eyes flicking briefly to Lorelai. "Madam, Miss Zimmerman." "Mr. Sullivan," Lorelai replied, surprised by how happy she was to see him. "How are you?" "Well enough," he answered. "And you, recovered from your ordeal?" "Yes, thank you. The Thorndikes have been very kind." An awkward silence fell. Mrs. Thorndike, ever the social facilitator, jumped in. "Mr. Sullivan, we're hosting a small gathering next Saturday evening. Nothing formal, just a few neighbors and friends. We'd be delighted if you'd join us." Zane looked startled by the invitation. "That's kind of you, madam, but I insist," she interrupted smoothly. "Consider it a belated thank you for saving our governess." Put that way, it was difficult for him to refuse without seeming rude. "I'll try to make it," he finally conceded. The church bell rang, saving him from further conversation. As they filed inside, Lorelai found herself seated with the Thorndikes near the front, while Zane took a place near the back. Throughout the service, she was distractingly aware of his presence behind her. Twice she caught herself turning slightly, as though she could glimpse him from the corner of her eye. It was ridiculous, this preoccupation with a man she barely knew. And yet, she couldn't deny the connection she felt, perhaps born of the intense circumstances of their meeting, or perhaps something more fundamental. After the service, the congregation gathered outside to socialize. Lorelai found herself surrounded by townsfolk eager to meet the new governess, and by the time she had a moment to look for Zane, he had disappeared. He always slips away right after service. Elizabeth Thorndike informed her matter-of-factly, noticing Lorelai's searching gaze. "Mama says he's a confirmed bachelor who avoids matchmaking mamas." Lorelai felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't, it's all right," the 10-year-old girl said with the wisdom of one much older. "He's handsome in a rough sort of way, and he did save your life. It's romantic." "Elizabeth," Lorelai admonished gently, "it's not proper to speculate about such things." The girl shrugged. "Maybe not, but I heard Mama tell Papa that Mr. Sullivan might be just what you need." Before Lorelai could respond to this alarming revelation, Mrs. Thorndike called for Elizabeth to join them at the carriage. The girl gave Lorelai a knowing look before skipping away. The idea that the Thorndikes were matchmaking unsettled Lorelai deeply. She had come west specifically to avoid romantic entanglements, to build a quiet life free from the complications of her past. The last thing she needed was well-intentioned employers pushing her toward the first eligible man they associated with her. Even if that man was the one who had breathed life back into her. The week passed quickly, filled with lessons for the children and preparations for Saturday's gathering. Mrs. Thorndyke seemed determined to make it a grander affair than initially described, adding more names to the guest list and planning an elaborate menu. "Nothing formal," she repeated whenever Lorelai expressed concern about the growing scale. "Just a few friends." By Saturday afternoon, the house was transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch and garden trees, tables were set up on the expansive lawn, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen where Mrs. Thorndyke supervised the cook and her assistants. "Miss Zimmerman, Mrs. Thorndyke called as Lorelai helped Elizabeth select a dress for the evening. "Could you come down? There's something I'd like to show you." Lorelai found her employer in the parlor, a dress of deep blue laid carefully across the sofa. "I thought you might like to wear this tonight, Mrs. Thorndyke said, beaming. "It's one of my niece's dresses that she left during her last visit. You're about her size, I believe." Lorelai stared at the dress. It was beautiful, far more elegant than anything she now owned, with delicate lace at the collar and a fashionable bustle. "It's lovely," she said hesitantly, "but I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense." Mrs. Thorndyke waved away her protest. "Consider it a gift. You've been wonderful with the children, and after what you've been through, you deserve something pretty." Touched by the woman's kindness, Lorelai accepted the dress. It felt like a lifetime since she'd worn anything so fine, not since the days before her hasty departure from St. Louis. Later, as she dressed for the evening, she found herself taking unusual care with her appearance. She arranged her dark hair in a becoming style, pinned with the few hairpins she'd managed to acquire since arriving, and even added a touch of rouge to her cheeks from the small pot Elizabeth had smuggled to her from her mother's vanity. The blue dress fit remarkably well, needing only minor adjustments at the waist. When she looked in the mirror, Lorelai hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back seemed too refined, too elegant to be the same person who had nearly drowned in the Colorado River a month ago. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth declared, watching from the doorway. "Like a princess." Lorelai smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "Hardly a princess, but thank you." "Do you think Mr. Sullivan will come?" Elizabeth asked innocently. "I have no idea," Lorelai replied, trying to sound indifferent though the question had been circling in her own mind all week. "I hope he does," Elizabeth confided. "Thomas says he's the best shot in the county and can throw a rope better than anyone. James just likes his horse." "And what about you?" Lorelai asked, amused by the children's assessment. "What do you think of Mr. Sullivan?" Elizabeth considered this seriously. "I think he's sad, but maybe he wouldn't be if he had someone to care for." The simple observation struck Lorelai with unexpected force. Before she could respond, Mrs. Thorndyke called from downstairs that the first guests had arrived. The evening unfolded pleasantly, with about 30 guests filling the Thorndykes' home and spilling onto the lamp-lit grounds. The weather cooperated beautifully, providing a warm evening with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of spring blossoms. Lorelai was introduced to what felt like half the town: the doctor and his wife, the banker, several prominent ranchers and merchants, the schoolteacher, and numerous others whose names blurred together. Everyone was welcoming, though she noted the speculative glances from some of the unmarried men and the evaluating looks from their mothers. An hour into the gathering, she had retreated to a quiet corner of the porch with a glass of lemonade when she heard the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching. Looking up, she saw Zane Sullivan riding toward the house. He'd made an effort with his appearance, she noted. His clothes, while not fancy, were clean and pressed. He'd trimmed his beard and again wore his hair neatly combed. As he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, she saw him take a deep breath, as though steeling himself for the socialization ahead. Mr. Thorndyke spotted him immediately. "Sullivan, glad you made it. Zane nodded, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "Thorndyke, Mrs. Thorndyke, thank you for the invitation." Come in, Mrs. Thorndyke urged. "There are plenty of people eager to meet you." Zane looked doubtful about that claim, but allowed himself to be led inside. Lorelai remained on the porch, strangely reluctant to follow immediately. Her heart was beating faster than the situation warranted, and she needed a moment to compose herself. When she finally entered the house, she found Zane surrounded by a small group, looking uncomfortable as Mr. Thorndyke recounted the story of Lorelai's rescue to an attentive audience, pulled her from the river and breathed the life back into her. Thorndyke was saying dramatically. "Isn't that right, Sullivan?" Zane shifted awkwardly. "I just did what needed doing." "Modest as always," Thorndyke laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Ah, here she is now, the lady herself." All eyes turned to Lorelai, including Zane's. Something flashed in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation before he quickly masked it. "Miss Zimmerman looks remarkably well after her ordeal," one of the women commented. "You'd never know she'd been at death's door." "Thanks entirely to Mr. Sullivan's quick action," Lorelai said, feeling the need to redirect some of the attention away from herself. "How exactly does one breathe life back into someone?" asked a young woman whom Lorelai recognized as the dressmaker's daughter. "It sounds rather intimate." The last word carried a hint of scandal, and several older ladies exchanged disapproving glances. Before anyone could respond, Mrs. Thorndyke smoothly intervened. "The important thing is that Miss Zimmerman was saved from a tragic fate. Now, has everyone tried the apple tarts? They're fresh from the oven." The conversation shifted, much to Lorelai's relief. As the group dispersed toward the refreshments, she found herself momentarily alone with Zane. "You came," she said simply. "Said I would," he replied. After a pause, he added, "You look well." "Thank you." "So do you." She gestured to the open doors leading to the garden. "It's a bit stuffy in here. Would you like to step outside?" He nodded, clearly relieved at the suggestion. They walked in silence to the edge of the garden where lantern light gave way to moonlight. The sounds of the party laughter, conversation, the occasional burst of music from someone playing the parlor piano faded to a pleasant backdrop. "Not much for gatherings like this," Zane finally said, looking more relaxed away from the crowd. "Neither am I, if I'm honest," Lorelai admitted. "Though the Thorndykes have been very kind. They're good people," he agreed. "I never properly thanked you," Lorelai said after another pause, "for saving my life. You did, as I recall, not adequately." She turned to face him directly. "I've had time to think about it, about what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. I would have died in that river, Mr. Sullivan. No one else would have found me in time." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Miss Zimmerman, Lorelai," she corrected. "Please." "After what we've been through, formality seems unnecessary." He hesitated, then nodded. "Lorelai, then. And I'm Zane, as you know." "Zane," she repeated, liking the way his name felt. "I want you to know that I understand the significance of what you did, not just pulling me from the river, but the rest." She felt heat rising in her cheeks, remembering his mouth on hers, breathing life into her lungs. "It wasn't," he began, then stopped, clearly struggling for words. "I mean, I wasn't trying to be forward." "I know," she assured him quickly. "It was a matter of life and death. I'm just grateful." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Lorelai felt something shift between them, the acknowledgement of a connection that went beyond rescuer and rescued. Before either could speak again, a child's voice broke the moment. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Sullivan." James Thorndyke came running toward them. "Mama says to tell you it's time for the dancing to start, and everyone needs to come inside." Zane looked alarmed. "Dancing?" "Yes," James confirmed enthusiastically. The furniture's been moved in the parlor and Mr. Peterson brought his fiddle. I should probably check on the other children, Lorelai began, but James grabbed her hand. Mama said especially to find you and Mr. Sullivan, the boy insisted, pulling her toward the house. Zane followed reluctantly, and as they re-entered the brightly lit parlor, Lorelai caught Mrs. Thorndyke watching them with obvious satisfaction. The matchmaking was apparently proceeding as planned. The next hour passed in a whirl of country dances. Lorelai was partnered first with Mr. Thorndyke, then with the doctor, the banker, and several other gentlemen. She enjoyed herself more than expected, finding the simple pleasure of movement and music a welcome distraction from her complicated thoughts. Zane, she noticed, remained on the periphery, declining invitations to dance with polite but firm refusals. Several times she caught him watching her, only to look away when their eyes met. As the evening progressed, Mrs. Thorndyke orchestrated a complex dance that required changing partners multiple times. Halfway through, Lorelai found herself face to face with Zane. "I believe this is where you're supposed to take my hand," she said with a small smile when he hesitated. Looking resigned but not displeased, he stepped forward and took her outstretched hand. His touch was warm and surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with cattle and horses. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned as they began to move. "You're doing fine," she assured him, aware of the eyes watching them. They moved together better than she expected, his natural grace compensating for his lack of practice. When his hand settled carefully at her waist for a turn, she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. "Everyone's watching us," he murmured, looking uncomfortable. "Let them," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "We're just dancing." The music swelled, and for a few precious moments, Lorelai allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of being held by this man who had saved her life. There was something undeniably right about it, as though her body recognized something her mind was still processing. All too soon, the dance required them to change partners again, and Lorelai was whisked away by the banker while Zane ended up with the minister's wife. They didn't have another opportunity to dance together, and shortly after the music ended, Lorelai noticed Zane slipping outside. Following an impulse she didn't fully understand, she excused herself and went after him. She found him by the hitching post preparing to mount his horse. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. He turned, looking only mildly surprised to see her. "It's getting late. I've got an early start tomorrow." "Of course." She stepped closer. "I'm glad you came." "So am I," he admitted, and she sensed he meant it. A silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. "Miss Zimmerman Lorelai," he corrected himself. "I was wondering if you might like to. That is, if you'd be interested in coming out to see my ranch sometime. It's nothing fancy, but there's good fishing in the creek, and the view from the North Ridge is worth the ride." The invitation clearly cost him some effort, and Lorelai felt touched by his awkward sincerity. "I'd like that very much," she replied softly. Relief and something like happiness crossed his face. "Good, that's good. Perhaps next Sunday after church, if the Thorndykes can spare you." "I'm sure they can," she said, suspecting they would be delighted by this development in their matchmaking scheme. "I'll bring an extra horse," he promised. "Unless you'd prefer to ride with me again." The last part came out in a rush, followed by a look of mortification, as though he couldn't believe he'd been so forward. Lorelai felt her cheeks warm. "An extra horse would be fine, though I'm not an experienced rider." "I'll find you something gentle," he assured her, regaining his composure. "Until Sunday, then." "Sunday," he confirmed, tipping his hat before mounting his horse. Lorelai watched him ride away, aware that she was smiling. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, She was looking forward to something, or rather to someone. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Lorelai threw herself into her duties with the Thorndyke children, but her thoughts constantly drifted to the upcoming Sunday, when she'd informed Mrs. Thorndyke of her plans. The woman had been predictably enthusiastic, instantly offering Lorelai the use of her riding habit. "It's a bit old-fashioned," Mrs. Thorndyke had said, "but it should fit well enough with some quick alterations." By Sunday morning, Lorelai was a bundle of nerves. She'd barely slept, alternating between anticipation and anxiety. What if she'd misinterpreted Zane's interest? What if she made a fool of herself attempting to ride? What if he discovered the secrets she kept hidden? The riding habit Mrs. Thorndyke had loaned her was indeed a few years out of date, but the deep green wool was of excellent quality and flattered Lorelai's coloring. With her hair pinned securely beneath a matching hat, she looked every inch the proper lady preparing for a social ride, not at all like someone with a scandalous past to conceal. After church, Zane was waiting outside with 2 horses, his own dun stallion and a gentle-looking bay mare. He'd made an effort with his appearance again, wearing the same clean clothes from church rather than changing into his work attire. "The mare's name is Willow," he said by way of greeting. "Borrowed her from my neighbor. She's steady as they come." "She's lovely," Lorelai replied, approaching the horse with more confidence than she felt. The mare regarded her with calm brown eyes, seemingly unperturbed by the nervous woman before her. With the Thorndykes and half the congregation watching, Zane helped Lorelai mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Once she was settled in the saddle, he adjusted the stirrups for her comfort. "Just relax and let her follow my lead," he advised, mounting his own horse. "She knows the trail." They set off at a leisurely pace, heading north out of town. As the houses and church faded behind them, Lorelai gradually relaxed, finding the rhythm of the horse's movement beneath her. The day was perfect for riding, sunny but not too warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. "You're a natural," Zane commented, watching her adjust to the saddle. "Hardly," she laughed, "but Willow is very patient with me." "She's good that way," he agreed. "How are you finding life with the Thorndykes?" "They're wonderful," Lorelai said sincerely. "The children are bright and generally well-behaved. Mrs. Thorndyke treats me more like family than an employee." "And Eagle Pass, is it what you expected?" She considered this. "I didn't know what to expect, really. But yes, I like it very much. It feels safe." The last word slipped out before she could consider its implications. Zane gave her a curious look. "Safe from what?" Lorelai busied herself adjusting her skirts. "Oh, you know. The usual dangers a woman alone might worry about." He didn't press, but she could tell he'd noted her evasion. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the trail winding through stands of aspen trees whose leaves fluttered like green coins in the breeze. Eventually, they crested a small ridge, and Zane's ranch came into view below. It was more substantial than Lorelai had imagined, a sturdy main house built of logs, a large barn, several corrals and outbuildings spread across a valley bordered by forested hills. A creek ran through the property, catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. "It's beautiful," Lorelai breathed, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Zane said simply, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "Let me show you around." The next few hours passed pleasantly as Zane guided her through his small kingdom. He showed her the barn where he kept his best horses, the corrals where young stock was trained, the garden behind the house that provided much of his summer food, and the smokehouse where he cured meat for winter. The house itself was simple but surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs occupied the center, and a couple of worn but comfortable-looking armchairs faced the hearth. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than Lorelai had expected. "You read," she observed, scanning the titles. History, some classics, practical manuals on ranching and veterinary medicine, and even a few volumes of poetry. "Winter nights are long," he said with a slight shrug. "Not much else to do when the snow's piled to the windowsills." She smiled, imagining him here alone on cold winter evenings, reading by the fire. It was a solitary image, but not an unhappy one. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent meal." "I'd like that," she replied. "And I can help. I'm a reasonably good cook, though the Thorndikes rarely let me near their kitchen." Together they prepared a simple but satisfying meal of pan-fried trout that Zane had caught that morning, potatoes, and early spring greens from his garden. Working alongside him in the kitchen felt surprisingly natural, as though they'd done it many times before, over lunch. They talked easily about small things, the children's latest antics, the spring calving season, the new shipment of books expected at the general store. Zane was more talkative here on his own land, more relaxed than she'd seen him before. After eating, he suggested they ride to the North Ridge he'd mentioned. "The view's worth it," he promised. The ride took them through a pine forest and up a gradually steepening trail. Willow followed Dust faithfully, requiring minimal guidance from Lorelai, who was growing more comfortable in the saddle. When they emerged from the trees at the ridge top, Lorelai gasped. Before them stretched a panoramic view of mountains still capped with snow, valleys greening with spring, and the distant silver ribbon of the Colorado River. "It's magnificent," she said, drinking in the vista. "This is why I stayed," Zane said quietly. "After buying the ranch, I rode up here on a day much like today. Looked out and knew I'd found where I belonged." The simple sincerity of his statement moved her. "I can understand why. I've never seen anything so beautiful." They dismounted, and Zane spread a blanket on a flat rock overlooking the view. They sat side by side, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the gentle whisper of the breeze through the pines. "Can I ask you something?" Zane ventured after a comfortable silence. "Of course." "You said you came west because the position with the Thorndikes offered better wages, but I get the feeling there was more to it than that." Lorelai tensed. She'd known this question might come, had prepared answers that were partial truths. But sitting here with this man who had saved her life, who had opened his home to her, the prepared half-truths felt wrong. "There was more," she admitted, choosing her words carefully. "I needed a fresh start. St. Louis had painful memories. The suitor who didn't work out." He guessed, recalling their earlier conversation. She nodded, looking out at the mountains rather than at him. "He was a prominent man in the community. Older, wealthy, respected. I was teaching at a school for young ladies when we met at a charity function. He was charming, attentive, everything a young woman is taught to want in a suitor." Zane listened silently, his expression carefully neutral. "We courted properly for several months. My parents were thrilled he was quite a catch, far above our modest social standing, but after we were engaged he changed." She paused, the memories still raw despite the passage of time. "He became controlling, jealous. If I spoke to another man, even in the most innocent context, there would be accusations sometimes. Consequences." "He hurt you," Zane said, not a question but a statement, his voice tight. "Yes," she whispered, "but always where it wouldn't show, and always with apologies after, promises it would never happen again." She shook her head at her own naivety. "I was going to break the engagement, but then my parents died in the fever epidemic. I had no family, few resources. He offered security, protection. At a price, Zane observed grimly. Indeed, things got worse after they died, and then I discovered he had other appetites, things I wouldn't accommodate. She swallowed hard. When I refused him, he became enraged. I feared for my life that night. I fled with just what I could carry, used the last of my savings to travel as far west as possible. She finally looked at Zane, expecting to see disgust or judgment in his eyes. Instead, she found only compassion and a simmering anger that was clearly directed not at her, but on her behalf. "Does he know where you are?" Zane asked. "No. I took care to cover my trail. Changed my name slightly. I was born Lorelai Zimmerman with 2 N's. A small change, but enough to confuse anyone searching. I paid a woman on the train to post a letter from Chicago suggesting I was heading east to New York." She sighed. "But he's a powerful man with connections. Sometimes I still fear he'll find me." Zane was quiet for a long moment. "No one will hurt you here," he finally said, his voice low and fierce. "I won't let that happen." The protective declaration warmed her, even as she recognized its limitations. "You can't promise that." "I can," he insisted, "and I do." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of the connection that had been growing since he'd breathed life back into her lungs. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Zane reached out and took her hand. His calloused palm was warm against hers, the gentle pressure of his fingers conveying more than words could express. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly, "for trusting me." Lorelai's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for listening, for not judging." "There's nothing to judge," he said firmly. "You survived. You rebuilt. That takes courage." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Zane reached up to brush it away, his touch impossibly gentle for a man of his strength. His hand lingered on her face, and Lorelai found herself leaning slightly into his touch. Time seemed suspended as they sat there, connected by touch and shared confidences against the backdrop of the magnificent landscape. Lorelai couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so seen, so understood. When Zane finally leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, not the desperate act that had saved her life by the riverside, but a tender beginning of something new. The kiss was brief, gentle, and when he pulled back, there was a question in his eyes. "I've wanted to do that properly since I first saw you open your eyes by the river," he admitted. Lorelai smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm glad you finally did." They stayed on the ridge until the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their favorite books. Zane spoke more openly about his experiences in the war, the wife he'd lost, and the years of drifting before finding his place here. It was only as the light began to fade that they reluctantly mounted their horses for the return journey. This time, they rode closer together, their knees occasionally brushing as the horses navigated the trail. "When can I see you again?" Zane asked as they approached the Thorndike property in the gathering dusk. "I have Thursday afternoons free," Lorelai replied. "Mrs. Thorndike takes the children to visit their grandmother then." "I'll come to town," he promised. "We could have lunch at the hotel restaurant if you'd like, or just walk." "Either would be lovely," she said, already looking forward to it. They reached the Thorndikes just as lamps were being lit inside. Zane helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Lorelai said softly. "Thank you for coming," he replied. After a brief hesitation, he added, "Lorelai, I want you to know that I understand you've been hurt. I don't expect. That is, I'm content to take things slowly." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. I appreciate that, but I also don't want the past to dictate my future forever." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Until Thursday, then." "Until Thursday," she echoed, reluctantly turning toward the house. Mrs. Thorndyke was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read but clearly watching for Lorelai's return. "Did you have a nice day, dear?" she asked, barely containing her curiosity. "Lovely," Lorelai replied simply, unwilling to share the precious details of the day just yet. "Mr. Sullivan seems like a fine man," Mrs. Thorndyke observed, watching Lorelai's face carefully. "He is," Lorelai agreed, unable to suppress a small smile. "Well," Mrs. Thorndyke said, looking pleased, "I'm glad to hear it. Very glad indeed." As Lorelai climbed the stairs to her room, she realized she was genuinely happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had receded, making room for something new and hopeful to take root. Perhaps, she thought as she prepared for bed, being pulled from the river had been more than a physical rescue. Perhaps Zane Sullivan had begun to breathe life back into her heart as well. The following weeks unfolded like the pages of a cherished novel. Zane came to town every Thursday, and they spent precious hours together walking along Eagle Pass's quiet streets, sharing meals at the small hotel restaurant, or simply sitting in the town square watching the world go by. Each Sunday after church, Lorelai rode out to the ranch with him, gradually becoming a confident horsewoman under his patient guidance. Their relationship progressed with careful tenderness. Zane never pushed, always attentive to Lorelai's comfort, seemingly content with gentle kisses and hours of conversation. For Lorelai, who had known only possessive, demanding affection before, his patience was a revelation. As spring gave way to early summer, Lorelai found herself flourishing. The nightmares that had plagued her since St. Louis grew less frequent. She laughed more easily, sang while teaching the children, and began to think of Eagle Pass as home rather than merely a hiding place. The Thorndykes observed the blossoming romance with obvious satisfaction, though Mrs. Thorndyke occasionally hinted that Zane might be moving too slowly. "A man in his position should be thinking of marriage, not endless courtship," she remarked one evening as Lorelai helped her mend linens. "He's not getting any younger after all." "We're taking our time," Lorelai replied diplomatically. "There's value in truly knowing someone before making such a commitment." Mrs. Thorndyke softened at that. "Of course, dear, and after what you've been through, caution is wise. I just don't want to see either of you miss out on happiness by being overly cautious." Lorelai appreciated the woman's concern, even if she found it somewhat premature. She and Zane had known each other barely 2 months. Even without her complicated past, that was hardly enough time to consider marriage, yet she couldn't deny that her feelings for him had deepened into something profound. She thought of him constantly when they were apart. His rare, transformative smile made her heart race. The strength and gentleness of his hands fascinated her. She found herself imagining a future at his side, building a life together on the beautiful ranch beneath the Colorado sky. It was a lovely dream, but one shadowed by the secrets she still kept. Though she'd told Zane the broad outlines of her past, she'd omitted the most damning details: exactly who her former fiancé was, the full extent of his cruelty, and the scandal that would erupt if he ever found her. Some truths were too heavy to share, even with someone as steadfast as Zane. One Thursday in late June, their usual meeting was disrupted by unexpected news. Lorelai arrived at the hotel restaurant to find Zane already waiting, his expression troubled. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, taking the seat across from him. Cattle rustlers hit the Watson place last night, he explained in a low voice. Took nearly 30 head, shot one of the hands when he tried to stop them. How terrible, Lorelai gasped. The Watsons owned the ranch neighboring Zane's. Will the hand recover? Doc thinks so. But everyone's on edge. Marshall's organizing a meeting tonight, wants every rancher there. You'll go, of course, she said. Understanding this would cut their time together short, he nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. I'm sorry. I was looking forward to our afternoon. Don't apologize, she assured him. This is important. They shared a quick meal, their usual leisurely conversation replaced by discussion of the rustlers and what it might mean for the area. Zane was concerned not just for his cattle, but for Lorelai's safety. Until they're caught, I want you to be extra cautious, he said as they walked back toward the Thorndikes. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. I doubt rustlers would be interested in a governess, she pointed out. Men desperate enough to shoot a ranch hand might not be particular, he countered grimly. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, she agreed, touched by his concern. At the Thorndikes' gate, Zane kissed her goodbye more urgently than usual. I'll try to come Sunday, but if we're tracking the rustlers, I might not make it. I understand, she assured him. Be safe, he nodded, his eyes lingering on her face as though memorizing it. Lorelai, he began, then hesitated. Yes. For a moment, it seemed he might say something significant, but instead he shook his head slightly. Nothing that can't wait. I'll see you as soon as I can. She watched him stride away, his tall figure soon disappearing around a corner. An unsettled feeling remained with her long after he'd gone, partly concerned for his safety, but also a nagging sense that something important had been left unsaid. Sunday came and went with no sign of Zane. Mrs. Thorndike, who usually received gossip quickly through her extensive social connections, reported that the marshal and a group of ranchers were still out tracking the rustlers, having found a trail leading into the foothills. By the following Thursday, Lorelai was sick with worry. There had been no word from Zane, and rumors around town suggested there had been another confrontation with the rustlers, possibly with casualties. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Lorelai asked Mr. Thorndike directly if he had any news. They caught up with the gang yesterday, he confirmed, his expression grave. There was a shootout. 2 of the rustlers killed, 1 wounded and captured, and he hesitated. And Zane, Lorelai asked, her heart in her throat. Sullivan was wounded, Mr. Thorndike said gently. Shot in the shoulder. Doc Pearson treated him at the Watson place, said the bullet went clean through. He should recover fully with rest. Relief and fear warred within her. Why didn't anyone tell me? We only just hurt ourselves, Mrs. Thorndike assured her. And we wanted to be certain of the facts before worrying you. I need to see him, Lorelai said immediately. Is he at his ranch now? The Thorndikes exchanged a look. Yes, but Lorelai, dear, Mrs. Thorndike began carefully, it might not be appropriate for you to visit him there alone. People might talk. Under normal circumstances, Lorelai would have cared about propriety, but these were not normal circumstances. I don't care what people say. He's hurt, and I need to see for myself that he's all right. Mr. Thorndike nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll have the carriage brought around. James can drive you out there and wait while you visit. Thank you, Lorelai said gratefully. An hour later, she was on her way to Zane's ranch, a basket of food and medical supplies beside her. James, the Thorndike stable hand, no relation to their son of the same name, guided the horses expertly along the now familiar road. When they arrived, Lorelai was struck by the unusual quiet of the place. Normally, even with Zane working alone, there would be some activity: horses in the corral, chickens pecking around the yard. Today, everything seemed still. Wait here, she instructed James. "I won't be long." She approached the house with growing apprehension. What if his injury was worse than reported? What if infection had set in? Her knock went unanswered. After a moment's hesitation, she tried the door and found it unlocked. "Zane," she called, stepping inside. The main room was empty, though a fire smoldered in the hearth. A glass and bottle of whiskey stood on the table beside an untouched plate of food. "Zane," she called again, moving toward the bedroom door at the back of the house. When there was no response, she pushed it open cautiously. He lay on the bed, eyes closed, face drawn with pain. His left shoulder was bandaged, the white linen stained with a small spot of red. He'd apparently attempted to change the dressing himself and done a poor job of it. "Zane," she said softly, approaching the bed. His eyes snapped open, hand reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. When he recognized her, he relaxed, though confusion replaced the alarm. "Lorelai, what are you doing here? I heard you were hurt," she said simply, setting her basket down and moving to his side. "Why didn't you send word?" he grimaced as he tried to sit up. "Didn't want to worry you." "It's just a scratch." "A bullet wound is hardly a scratch," she countered, helping him adjust his position. "And I was worried anyway with no word from you for days." "I'm sorry," he said, looking genuinely contrite. "Things happened fast. We tracked them into the hills, then there was the shootout. By the time we got back, I just wanted to get home." Lorelai studied him, noting the exhaustion in his face, the strain around his eyes. "When did you last eat?" He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Yesterday." "I made coffee this morning." "Coffee isn't food," she chided gently. "I brought soup, bread, and some of Mrs. Thorndyke's apple tarts and clean bandages." "You didn't have to come all this way," he protested weakly. "Yes, I did," she said firmly. "Now let me see that shoulder." To her surprise, he didn't argue further. She helped him remove his shirt, trying to maintain professional detachment despite the intimacy of the situation. The wound looked clean but angry, the skin around it red and hot to the touch. "This needs proper care," she said, retrieving the medical supplies from her basket. "Did Doc Pearson leave any instructions?" "Keep it clean, change the bandage daily," Zane recited. "He left some powder to prevent infection." Lorelai worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with warm water and soap, applying the medicinal powder and wrapping it with fresh bandages. Her touch was gentle but sure, and she noted with satisfaction that Zane seemed to relax under her ministrations. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked as she tied off the bandage. "My father was a doctor," she explained, another of the half-truths she'd cultivated. Her father had indeed been a physician before drink and gambling had cost him his practice. "I often assisted him." When she'd finished with his shoulder, she heated the soup she'd brought and insisted he eat. Zane complied without protest, seeming grateful for the care. "The marshal got the full story from the rustler they captured," he said between spoonfuls. "They're part of a larger gang operating out of Wyoming. This was just a scouting party, testing how easy pickings might be in our area." "Will there be more trouble?" she asked worriedly. "Not likely. The one they caught is singing like a bird to avoid hanging." Marshall wired the federal authorities. They'll send marshals to round up the rest of the gang. Relief washed through her. "Good. I couldn't bear it if—" She trailed off, unable to voice her fear. Zane reached for her hand. "I'm fine, Lorelai. It'll take more than one bullet to keep me down." "Don't joke about that," she said sharply, surprising them both with her vehemence. "I can't lose you." The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Zane's eyes softened as he squeezed her hand. "You won't," he promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Emotion welled in her throat. The fear of the past days, the relief at finding him alive, and the deeper feelings she'd been harboring converged in an overwhelming wave. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words emerging before she could consider them. Once spoken, she wouldn't take them back. "I know it hasn't been long and perhaps it's too soon to say such things, but seeing you hurt, thinking I might lose you." She shook her head. "Life is too uncertain to leave important things unsaid." Zane stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, moving carefully to avoid jarring his injured shoulder, he pulled her closer. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Have since that day on the ridge when you trusted me with your story. Maybe even before that." He kissed her then, a kiss deeper and more passionate than the careful ones they'd shared before. Lorelai responded in kind, years of fear and restraint giving way to the joy of being truly loved, truly wanted by a good man. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday. Be my wife, my partner." Lorelai closed her eyes, overwhelmed by happiness yet unable to fully banish the shadow of her past. "You don't know everything about me," she whispered. "About what happened in St. Louis." "I know enough," he countered. "I know you're kind, intelligent, and stronger than you realize. I know you care deeply for those children, that you face each day with courage despite what you've endured. Whatever else there is, we'll face it together." She wanted desperately to believe him, to trust that his love would withstand the full truth. Looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, she found her fears receding. "Yes," she said simply, "I will marry you, Zane Sullivan." His smile was radiant, transforming his face in the way that never failed to make her heart skip. "You've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory." They spent the next hour talking of the future, making tentative plans. Zane wanted a fall wedding after the busy summer season on the ranch. Lorelai agreed, thinking it would give her time to save money to contribute to their start together. "I should go," she said eventually, noting the lengthening shadows. "James is waiting with the carriage and the Thorndikes will worry. When will you tell them?" Zane asked, reluctant to see her leave. "Soon," she promised. "Though I suspect Mrs. Thorndike has been planning our wedding since the day you pulled me from the river." He laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his shoulder. "You're probably right. That woman has the matchmaking instincts of a general planning a campaign." Lorelai helped him back to bed, insisted he take the medicine Doc Pearson had left for pain, and promised to return the following day. As she was about to leave, Zane caught her hand. "I meant what I said before," he told her earnestly. "Whatever secrets you're still keeping, whatever happened in St. Louis, it doesn't change how I feel. When you're ready to tell me everything, I'll be here. And if you're never ready, that's all right too." Tears pricked her eyes at his understanding. "You deserve the whole truth," she said softly. "And you'll have it soon, I promise." With a final kiss, she left him to rest, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the complications that still lay ahead. The ride back to town gave Lorelai time to think. She loved Zane with a depth that surprised her, trusted him more than she'd ever trusted anyone. Yet the final barrier remained the complete truth about her past, the reason she'd fled St. Louis in the night like a criminal. If she and Zane were to build a life together, he deserved to know exactly what risks that entailed. Her former fiancé, Charles Blackwell, wasn't merely wealthy and cruel, he was politically connected, obsessively vindictive, and had resources to track her across the country if he chose to. She'd been careful, changing her name slightly, creating false trails. But marriage would require documentation, records that might eventually lead back to her. And Blackwell had made it clear that if she ever humiliated him by breaking their engagement, he would destroy her completely. The question that haunted her was whether her happiness with Zane was worth potentially bringing danger to his door. She believed his love would withstand the truth, but could she bear it if her past caused him harm? By the time the carriage reached the Thorndyke house, Lorelai had made her decision. She would tell Zane everything without omission. Only then could they decide together whether the risk was worth taking. As expected, Mrs. Thorndyke was waiting anxiously for her return. "How is he?" she asked before Lorelai had even stepped from the carriage. "Recovering," Lorelai assured her. "The wound is clean, and with proper rest he should heal completely." Relief crossed the older woman's face. "Thank goodness. We've been so worried. Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted." Once inside, Lorelai found herself facing both Thorndykes in the parlor. Their expressions were kind but expectant. "There's something I need to tell you," Lorelai began, deciding to share her news immediately. "Zane has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted." Mrs. Thorndyke clasped her hands in delight. "Wonderful news. I knew you two were perfectly suited from the moment he brought you here." "Congratulations," Mr. Thorndyke added warmly. "Sullivan's a good man. He'll make you a fine husband." "Thank you," Lorelai said, touched by their genuine happiness for her. "We're thinking of an autumn wedding if that's amenable to you. I wouldn't want to leave you without a governess with no notice." "Of course we'll work something out," Mrs. Thorndyke assured her. "The children will miss you terribly, but they'll be thrilled to attend your wedding. And you must stay here until then, of course." "That's very kind," Lorelai said sincerely. "There's something else I should tell you, something I haven't been entirely truthful about." The Thorndykes exchanged a glance. "What is it, dear?" Mrs. Thorndyke asked gently. Lorelai took a deep breath. "My name is actually Lorelai Zimmerman with two N's. I changed it slightly when I left St. Louis, and I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my reasons for coming west." Over the next hour, Lorelai shared the full story she'd never told anyone in Eagle Pass. How Charles Blackwell had been not just wealthy but a political powerhouse in Missouri, a man with gubernatorial ambitions and connections to some of the most influential families in the state. How his abuse had escalated from controlling behavior to physical violence, culminating in a night of terror when he tried to force himself on her in ways that left her physically ill and emotionally shattered. She told them about fleeing in the night, about the station master who'd helped her board a train west with no questions asked, about living in constant fear that Blackwell's reach would extend even to the territories. "He threatened that if I ever left him, he'd find me and make me wish I'd never been born," she concluded, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "I believe he meant it. That's why I've been so careful, why I changed my name." Throughout her story, the Thorndykes listened without interruption, their expressions shifting from shock to sympathy to outrage. When she finished, Mrs. Thorndyke moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hands. "My dear brave girl," she said, tears in her eyes. "To have endured such treatment and still to be so kind, so dedicated to the children. You are remarkable." "Does Sullivan know?" Mr. Thorndyke asked, his normally jovial face grave. "Some of it," Lorelai admitted. "He knows I fled an abusive fiancé, but not the details or the man's name or position. I plan to tell him everything tomorrow." Mr. Thorndyke nodded thoughtfully. "A wise decision. No marriage should begin with secrets between husband and wife." He paused. "But Lorelai, you should know that if this Blackwell ever found you, you wouldn't face him alone. Eagle Pass protects its own." "He's right," Mrs. Thorndyke agreed firmly. "You're family to us now. Anyone wishing to harm you would have to go through the entire town." Lorelai felt tears well in her eyes at their unwavering support. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can never express what your kindness has meant to me." "Nonsense," Mrs. Thorndyke said briskly, reverting to her practical nature. "Now we should start planning." An autumn wedding gives us only a few months. There's a dress to consider, flowers to arrange, guests to invite. As Mrs. Thorndyke launched enthusiastically into wedding plans, Lorelai allowed herself to hope. Perhaps here, surrounded by good people, protected by the man she loved, she could finally stop running and build a life without fear. The next morning, Lorelai returned to Zane's ranch, this time driving herself in a small buggy the Thorndykes had insisted she borrow. She found him looking considerably better, moving around the house with care but more color in his face. The fresh bandage she'd applied was still clean, suggesting the wound was healing properly. "You didn't have to come back so soon," he said, though his smile belied his protest. "Yes, I did," she replied, placing a basket of fresh provisions on the table. "We need to talk, and I'd prefer to do it here where we can have privacy." Something in her tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of the conversation ahead. He gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. "Let's sit, then." Once they were settled, Lorelai took a deep breath. "I told you I would share the whole truth about my past, and I meant it. Some of what I'm going to tell you will be difficult to hear, and perhaps difficult to forgive. But I need you to know everything before we move forward with our plans." "Nothing you tell me will change how I feel," Zane assured her, reaching for her hand. "Please don't promise that until you've heard everything," she said gently. "My former fiancé in St. Louis. He wasn't just any man. His name is Charles Blackwell, and he's one of the wealthiest, most politically connected men in Missouri." Zane's expression remained steady, encouraging her to continue. Over the next hour, Lorelai revealed every detail she'd kept hidden: the full extent of Blackwell's abuse, his political aspirations, the powerful friends who would support his version of events over hers, should he ever find her. She spoke of her desperate flight, the false trails she'd laid, and the constant fear that had been her companion. "The night I left, he threatened to destroy not just me, but anyone who helped me," she concluded. "He said he would use every resource at his disposal to find me, no matter how long it took. I believe he meant it. That's what I'm bringing into our marriage, Zane, not just my love and commitment, but this danger that might never materialize, or might appear at our door at any moment." Throughout her story, Zane had listened intently, his expression darkening at the worst parts but never wavering in its focus on her. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You think he's still looking for you?" he finally asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been over a year. He may have moved on, found someone else to control, or his pride may still be driving him to find me. That uncertainty is part of what I'm asking you to accept." Zane rose and moved to the window, staring out at his land as he absorbed everything she'd told him. Lorelai remained in her chair, her heart pounding, preparing herself for the possibility that he might withdraw his proposal. When he turned back to her, his expression was resolute. "I meant what I said yesterday. I love you, Lorelai, and I want to marry you. Nothing you've told me changes that." Relief washed through her, though she needed to be certain he fully understood. "Zane, if he ever found us, he would be dangerous. Not just to me, but to you as well. Let him come," Zane said with quiet ferocity. "I fought in the bloodiest war this country has ever seen. I've built this ranch from nothing, defended it against rustlers and nature's worst. I'm not afraid of some Eastern politician with soft hands and a mean streak." He crossed to her chair and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "Lorelai, I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You don't have to be alone anymore." Tears slipped down her cheeks as the weight of years of fear and loneliness began to lift. "I love you," she whispered, "more than I can possibly say." "Then marry me," he said simply. "Not in the fall. Now, as soon as the preacher can say the words." She laughed through her tears. "What about the harvest, the roundup?" "They'll wait," he said with certainty. "I've waited my whole life to find someone like you. I don't want to waste another day." Looking into his eyes, seeing the absolute conviction there, Lorelai found her final reservations melting away. "Yes," she agreed. "Let's not wait." 3 weeks later, on a perfect July morning, Lorelai Zimmerman became Lorelai Sullivan in Eagle Pass's white clapboard church. The entire town seemed to attend, filling the small building to capacity and spilling onto the grounds outside. The Thorndike children participated proudly, Elizabeth as flower girl, Thomas as ring bearer, and James as honorary usher. Mrs. Thorndike had wept openly as Mr. Thorndike escorted Lorelai down the aisle to where Zane waited, handsome in a new suit despite the slight stiffness in his healing shoulder. The dress had been a gift from the women of Eagle Pass. When they learned of the hasty wedding plans, they had banded together, using fabric ordered for Mrs. Peterson's daughter but happily donated to the cause. Working day and night, they had created a gown more beautiful than anything Lorelai could have imagined, simple yet elegant, with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful, the words spoken with genuine conviction by both bride and groom. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zane's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with tables set up in the town square, music provided by local musicians, and enough food to feed twice the population. Lorelai danced with her new husband, with Mr. Thorndike, with the doctor, the marshal, and numerous other men of the town, all while receiving warm congratulations and well wishes. As twilight deepened into dusk, Zane finally claimed her for the last dance. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Sullivan?" He murmured in her ear. The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she replied simply. "I'm ready." They said their goodbyes amid cheerful teasing and genuine good wishes. The Thorndike children extracted promises of frequent visits, which Lorelai happily gave. Mrs. Thorndike embraced her with maternal affection. "Be happy, my dear," she whispered. "You deserve it." Zane helped Lorelai into the wagon he'd decorated with ribbons and wildflowers for the occasion. As they drove away from town toward their ranch, their home, Lorelai leaned against her husband's shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "Any regrets?" Zane asked softly. "Not one," she assured him, looking up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "This is where I belong." "With you." He smiled down at her, his face illuminated by the rising moon. "Welcome home, Lorelai Sullivan." Epilogue. 1 year later, the summer sun beat down on the valley as Lorelai hung laundry on the line behind the ranch house. The past year had transformed the property in subtle but significant ways: curtains at the windows, a vegetable garden twice the previous size, flower beds blooming with color, and a new rocking chair on the porch where she often sat in the evenings while Zane smoked his pipe. Inside, the house had changed too. A proper bedroom set now replaced Zane's simple bed frame. Bookshelves had been expanded to accommodate Lorelai's growing collection. The kitchen boasted new cookware and dishes, making it easier for her to prepare the meals they now shared every day. But the most significant changes were less tangible. Laughter filled rooms that had once known only silence. Plans were made for the future rather than just for surviving the present. And love, deep, abiding love, had transformed two wounded souls into something stronger together than either had been alone. As Lorelai pinned the last shirt to the line, she felt the now familiar fluttering in her belly. Their first child was due in late autumn, a prospect that filled both parents with joyful anticipation. Zane had already begun building a cradle, working on it in the evenings by the fire while Lorelai sewed tiny garments. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw Zane riding toward the house, returning early from checking the herd in the north pasture. Beside him rode Thomas Thorndyke, now 11 and spending 2 weeks at the ranch learning the basics of cattle ranching. Lorelai smiled as they dismounted. Thomas had thrived under Zane's patient instruction, blossoming from a somewhat bookish boy into one eager to learn practical skills. The Thorndyke children remained a significant part of their lives, visiting regularly and still receiving occasional lessons from their former governess. "You're back early," she called as they approached. "Storm brewing in the mountains," Zane explained, gesturing toward the distant peaks where dark clouds were gathering. "Thought we'd better head in before it hits." "I helped move the cattle to the lower meadow," Thomas announced proudly. "Mr. Sullivan said I've got a natural way with them." "He's a quick study," Zane agreed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Going to make a fine rancher someday if that's what he chooses." Lorelai's heart swelled seeing them together. Zane had taken naturally to mentoring, revealing a patience and gentleness that would serve him well as a father. "I've made lemonade," she said, "and there's fresh bread if you're hungry." As they settled on the porch with their refreshments, Lorelai listened to Thomas excitedly recount the morning's activities. Zane's hand found hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. His touch still thrilled her, even after a year of marriage. Later, after Thomas had gone to wash up before lunch, Zane pulled Lorelai close, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as though needing reassurance that her contentment matched his own. "Completely," she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "Are you?" His smile, that rare, transforming smile that had first captured her heart, was answer enough, but he added words too. "More than I ever thought possible." The fear that had once been Lorelai's constant companion had faded to a distant memory. Charles Blackwell and St. Louis seemed to belong to another lifetime, another person. Here, on this land with this man, she had found not just safety but joy, not just protection but partnership. Zane had indeed breathed life back into her lungs that day by the river. But more importantly, day by day, with patience and unwavering love, he had breathed life back into her heart. And together, they had created a new life, one that would be born into love rather than fear, welcomed rather than controlled, cherished for exactly who they would become. As the first raindrops began to fall, they moved inside, hand in hand, ready to face whatever storms might come together.